Deep in the American South, small town America, where you might want to think twice before you take a bite of that mystery meat on your plate. If you're intrigued by this, stick around after the intro. What's up, everybody? My name is Brad, and today I'm back with another book review for you guys. If you happen to be new to the channel, I read a lot of indie and small press horror, a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of sci-fi. So if that sounds like something you are interested in, please consider hitting the subscribe button down below. Check out some of the other content on the channel, and maybe you'll discover a book that you enjoy. But for today's book review, we're going to be talking about Juniper by Jeffery. Now, when I was reading this book, if you remember those old beef, it's what's for dinner commercials, those popped into my head for some reason, that little jingle. I'm not really sure why, but beef, it's definitely not on the menu any longer for the residents of Juniper. Chicken and pork, those are off the table as well. So it really sounds like a vegetarian's paradise here, right? Nope, you'd be wrong about that as well. The crops are basically all dead. After this severe flood came in and washed away all of the farmland of this small, neglected town in the American South, it's now being plagued by this scorching heat wave and drought that's basically killed off any hope of growing anything else. So you might be asking yourself, what do the residents here, what do the folks here in Juniper do for food? Well, some people, like Betty, have resorted to scavenging roadkill off the side of the road for their dinner, while others, like Janet, have started breeding an unusual type of cattle, we'll call it that. Speaking of Betty and Janet, the main strength of the book, in my opinion, was definitely the character work. Jeffery has created some in-depth, interesting, intriguing, and quirky characters here. Betty herself, she's this little old lady that lives way out on the outskirts of town. She's lonely. She doesn't have anybody with her anymore. Her husband has passed away. She doesn't have a car, so she has to walk everywhere she goes with this blistering heat just always bearing down on her. She might be a bit senile, she's a bit odd, but she's definitely a character that you can feel yourself pulling for and rooting for as she struggles to survive in this sort of wasteland that the town now finds itself in. One day while she's out scavenging for roadkill, she comes across something that's a bit larger than she normally sees, and it's not quite dead yet. And she decides to scoop it up and carry it back home before anyone else comes to claim the prize that she has found. So on the other hand, Janet, she's the opposite of the recluse at the edge of town. She's actually sort of become a bit famous as of late with the breeding of her new cattle, which is keeping the bellies of the townsfolk full. This isn't your ordinary food source. Janet, she's actually interbreeding these monstrous cats and serving them up for dinner. And that's not a spoiler, that's in the synopsis on the back of the book. That sounds horrible, but you'll actually come to sympathize with Janet, especially when you learn that basically everyone in town knows and sees the burn marks and the bruises all along her body that she's trying to cover up, courtesy of her husband, Klein. Klein, he is this soured soul wrapped in a suit of flesh. He's a despicable, hateful, hot-tempered individual. You'll really come to loathe him as a character. He's a truly despicable person that takes his anger and aggression out on Janet, who's totally undeserving of the batterings and beatings that she gets. He actually beats her so bad at one point, he almost kills her, sends her to the hospital, and he ends up in prison for a while. He's back out of prison now, and he's no better now than he was when he went in. So these three characters' lives, Betty, Janet, and Klein, they all intertwine and make up the heart of our story here. So one day when Bucky, which is Janet's prized ginger tom cat, goes missing, it's around the same time that Betty finds this large, nearly dead roadkill on the side of the highway. Coincidence? Maybe, maybe not. You'll have to read for yourself and find out. But these events all lead these characters on a collision course that ends up both shocking and violent. I'm still not fully sure I've wrapped my head around the ending quite yet. I do have some questions. I'm going to be super vague. I don't want to give anything away at all. But you might need to have some suspension of disbelief to have all the pieces neatly fall into place here at the end. But I definitely think it was a super bold decision and ending that Ross chose here. And I really applaud him for going all out and sticking to the story that he was wanting to tell. Let's backtrack and talk about the town of Juniper itself for a minute. It's a fly speck of a town that has long since faded from the memories of America. There's no visitors who come to Juniper. There's only those who are passing through, catching fleeting glimpses of the decay out their window as they speed along the 701 headed towards their destinations. It's been left to its own devices. It's not receiving aid from the government or any type of help from neighboring counties. It's just been left to sort of sit and stew and rot all on its own. The synopsis on the back of the book says this is post-apocalyptic, but I sort of disagree with that. When I think of post-apocalyptic, I already think of societies that have crumbled and are already in ruin, and the survivors are just brutally struggling against each other to survive, and we're not quite there yet. Don't get me wrong, things are bad in Juniper, but I think the flood and the drought are precursors to the end instead of the end itself. So I think this is sort of pre-apocalyptic. I think Kevin Well-Redbeard used that same phrase, pre-apocalyptic. Now, things are bad. They're definitely on the slippery slope down towards the beginnings of the end, but we're not quite in the final stage of, every man for themselves quite yet. There's still somewhat of a functioning society. They're still civil towards each other in the community, but we're definitely on the road towards it being post-apocalyptic, just not quite there just yet. Now, if I had one negative about the book, it was that time and place felt a bit ambiguous to me, in my opinion. It wasn't anything that detracted from the narrative and the story itself. It was just something that felt a bit off for me. First, we'll talk about time. I don't think the book ever says, but I believe the book is probably set sometime in the 2000s. But for me, I would be lulled into the sense that, this was an older story that took place in like the 40s or 50s, sort of another American Dust Bowl, if you will. So I'd be in that mindset, and then all of a sudden a character would talk about the computer at the library, or someone would pull out their cell phone, and it would just throw me off a little bit. The sense of time wasn't as concrete as I wanted it to be. Also with the place, this takes place in the American South, but it almost felt like the town of Juniper sort of floated around in the idea of what someone thought the American South was. I was never able to quite pinpoint a location where this would be in the South. Again, it wasn't a concrete thing for me. It just sort of floated around. Maybe it could have been here, maybe it could have been there. It just was a bit ambiguous and wasn't a definite, this is where it is located. And again, it wasn't anything that detracted from the narrative or the story, just something that felt a bit off for me. And I'm sure 99.9% of the other readers that come across this book, those two things won't even be a blip on their radar. They were just something that I noticed that felt a bit off. But again, it didn't detract from the overall enjoyment of the story at all. Bold, bizarre, and grotesque, Juniper by Ross Jeffery is a perversely disturbing yet weirdly moving tale of the struggle to survive and persevere when the odds are stacked against you. Populated with characters that you can love, feel sorry for, and utterly despise. Honestly, my initial gut rating once I got done with this book was that this was a 3-star read. It was good, but I didn't love it. But after sitting on it for a while, letting my thoughts sort of simmer, and discussing the book with some other reviewers who have read it, I think I've come to appreciate even more so what Ross has crafted here. I think my enjoyment of it has gone up some. So I'm giving it 4 stars. I think it has benefited from me sort of sitting on it for a little bit. So I gave it 4 stars. I did truly, really enjoy the story. I was just really the time and place were sort of off. And I do have some questions about the end that Ross might answer. I'll ask him. He might not answer. We'll see. But I did thoroughly enjoy my time in Juniper. There's another book coming out taking place in Juniper called Tome. I think it comes out this month in October, and I'm definitely going to be checking that one out. Ross is a hell of a writer and just a really bizarre storyteller, and I look forward to seeing what more he has to offer. But this has been my 4-star review of Juniper by Ross Jeffery. That's all I have for you guys today, so thank you for spending your time with me. Again, my name is Brad, and I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.